The wind howled across the cracked highways of dead America, carrying the scent of dust, ash, and something far more chilling, decay. Mason Carter crouched behind the rusted skeleton of an old gas station sign, squinting through a pair of battered binoculars. His heart pounded in his chest as he watched a small cluster of the infected shuffle through the empty lot. Their grayish skin stretched tightly over bone, and their hollow eyes twitched at every sound. "Clear on the right," whispered Lana, her voice barely a breath in the tense silence. She was kneeling beside Mason, gripping a crowbar so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Mason lowered the binoculars, glancing at their small group. There were only 5 of them left now. Once, they had been part of a larger convoy, a hopeful crowd trying to make it to the fabled northern safe zone. But over the past few months, the Wastelands had claimed most of their people, to hunger, to betrayal, or to the hordes of undead that roamed the land. Beside Lana stood Malik, a sharp-eyed ex-mechanic whose quiet strength had saved them more times than Mason could count. There was also Olivia, a former teacher who carried an old, weathered journal everywhere, jotting down every detail she could, as if writing it all down would help make sense of the nightmare. And finally, there was Ethan, the youngest of them, barely 17, still wearing his old school hoodie. He clung to his worn-out backpack like it was a lifeline. Mason took a steadying breath. "We wait until they move past. Then we push through the service road. It's only 2 miles to the old ranger station." Lana frowned. "Do you think the signal's real?" That was the question they all feared asking out loud. Earlier that morning, their radio, long silent, crackling with only static, had come to life. A woman's voice, calm but urgent, had broken through. "If anyone can hear this, there's a safe zone. Northern border. Coordinates 48.2 by -117.3. We have shelter, food, clean water, medical supplies. You must avoid major roads. Trust no strangers. If you can reach us, we will take you in. We are humanity's last light. Please, come." It had sounded almost too good to be true. In fact, Mason wasn't sure whether to believe it or not. But after months of hiding, scraping together food, and watching friends fall one by one, the message had been like a spark. "It's real," Mason said firmly, not just for Lana's sake but for his own. "We've come this far. We're going to make it." The group waited, breaths held, as the infected shuffled past the gas station and disappeared behind the collapsed overpass. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath too. "Now," Mason whispered. They moved quickly, boots crunching softly over cracked asphalt. Mason led the way, heart thudding, eyes darting left and right. Every shadow seemed alive, every sound suspicious. Dead America was no longer just a place, it was a living, hunting thing. The service road wound through a stretch of dry woods, the trees thin and skeletal. Mason kept a steady pace, knowing they couldn't afford to linger in the open. Overhead, the sun hung low, casting long, eerie shadows. Ethan hurried to catch up beside Mason. "Do you really think people are there? At the safe zone, I mean." Mason glanced at the boy's hopeful face. "I think we have to believe they are. If we don't, what are we doing out here?" Ethan fell silent, gripping his backpack tighter. Mason knew the kid had lost his whole family in the first wave. He carried their photos in that bag, along with a few scraps of food and a broken handheld game he hadn't powered on in months. Suddenly, a sharp snap echoed through the woods. The group froze. Malik held up a hand, eyes narrowing. Lana crouched low, readying her crowbar. Olivia clutched her journal to her chest, her breath quick and shallow. Mason scanned the trees, heart hammering. Another snap, closer this time. "Stay together," Mason hissed. The bushes ahead rustled, and a figure stumbled out, human. A man, wild-eyed, filthy, his clothes shredded. His mouth moved, but no words came out. Mason barely had time to react before the man collapsed onto the ground, crawling toward them. "Help, help me," the man croaked. Mason took a cautious step forward, but Malik grabbed his arm. "Wait." The man's eyes rolled back. Blood oozed from a wound at his side. But before anyone could approach, another sound drifted through the trees, a low, hungry groaning. Mason's stomach dropped. From the shadows, a dozen infected emerged, their movements jerky and unnatural. "It's a trap!" Lana shouted. The group scattered, dodging through the trees as the infected surged forward, drawn by the noise and scent of living flesh. Mason's breath tore in his throat as he sprinted, the screams of the injured man mixing with the guttural growls of the dead. He knew this was just the beginning. If they were going to make it across the wastelands, if they were going to reach that last safe zone, they would need to fight harder, move faster, and trust no one. Dead America wasn't going to let them go easily. Mason's feet pounded the forest floor, dodging low branches and leaping over fallen logs as the dead surged behind them. The groans grew louder, desperate, hungry, the sound of creatures that had forgotten everything except the drive to feed. "Don't stop!" Mason shouted over his shoulder, glancing back. He saw Lana sprinting with the crowbar clenched tight, her blonde hair flying. Malik stayed close to Olivia, helping her over roots, his long strides measured and steady. But Ethan, where was Ethan? Mason's heart seized. He twisted, scanning the shadows. There, Ethan was struggling to untangle his backpack from a bush, panic written all over his face. Mason veered off the path, lungs burning, and grabbed the boy's arm, yanking him free. "Leave it, kid. Move." They bolted just as a snarling infected lunged, its broken teeth snapping inches from Ethan's back. Mason shoved the creature hard, sending it crashing into the undergrowth, and didn't look back. Ahead, the trees thinned, revealing the crumbling outline of the old ranger station. The building was half swallowed by vines and decay, but its stone walls looked solid enough, at least for the night. Inside, Malik barked, already forcing open the warped door. The group tumbled in, slamming it shut behind them. Mason dropped to his knees, gasping, while Malik braced the door with a nearby cabinet. Outside, the dead slammed against the wood, their fingers clawing, their faces pressed grotesquely against the glass. Olivia slid down the wall, shaking. "That was too close." "No kidding," Lana muttered, pacing. Ethan sat cross-legged, staring at his torn backpack. Mason knelt beside him, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You okay?" "I lost the photos," Ethan whispered, voice small and hollow. Mason's chest tightened, but he forced himself to speak gently. "We're still breathing. That's what matters right now." For a few minutes, the group sat in uneasy silence, catching their breath. Outside, the infected scraped and moaned, but the thick stone walls held firm. Mason stood, forcing himself to stay focused. They needed a plan. He glanced around the ranger station, an old wooden desk, some dusty filing cabinets, a cracked map pinned to the wall. Malik moved methodically, checking the windows, testing the strength of the door. Lana crouched by the window, peering out through a narrow gap. "We can't stay here long," Malik said quietly. "We'll draw more in." "I know," Mason agreed. "But we need to rest, at least a little. And we need to figure out our next move." Lana let out a slow breath. "You still think that radio message is real?" Mason met her gaze. "I have to. Because if it wasn't, then they were wandering through a wasteland with no purpose, no destination, just waiting to run out of luck." Olivia had opened her journal, flipping through pages covered in neat, desperate handwriting. The message said to avoid major roads. "There's an old supply route that cuts north through the hills. It's slower, but less exposed." Mason studied the cracked map on the wall. Sure enough, a narrow dotted line traced a path through the hills, avoiding the major highways. "That's our best shot," he said. "We leave at dawn." A loud crash made everyone jump. The front window cracked under the weight of two infected pressing against it, their faces twisted and snarling. Malik rushed forward, shoving a cabinet in front of the glass, while Mason helped Lana secure the doorframe. For a moment, Mason caught the infected's gaze through the crack, and a cold shiver ran down his spine. These things never stopped. They didn't sleep. They didn't tire. They would keep coming. Everyone get some rest, Mason ordered quietly. We take turns keeping watch. Malik nodded, settling into a chair by the door. Lana curled up near the window, crowbar across her chest. Olivia sat cross-legged, scribbling hurried notes in her journal, her face pale but determined. Ethan huddled close to the fireless hearth, arms wrapped around his knees. Mason sat down, rubbing his face. His body ached, his mind buzzed with exhaustion, but he couldn't let himself drift off. Not yet. Through the thin sliver of the window, he watched the night deepen. Stars blinked coldly overhead, while shadows moved restlessly outside. Somewhere in the distance, a faint howl echoed, not a dog, but something stranger, more chilling. He leaned his head back, eyes half closed, listening to the others' quiet breathing. They were still alive. That was something. But Mason knew, deep down, that this journey across dead America's wastelands wasn't just going to test their endurance. It was going to test their trust. Their choices. Their humanity. He didn't know who they might meet out there, or what dangers still waited on the road. But he knew one thing for certain. They weren't just fighting the dead. They were fighting time. And if they didn't reach that safe zone soon, it wouldn't matter how strong they were or how well they worked together. Because out here, in the Deadlands, survival was never guaranteed. By dawn, a mist had rolled in, wrapping the forest in pale tendrils. Mason stirred from his light, uneasy sleep, his muscles stiff from the cold. Outside, the dead still wandered, moaning faintly, but most had drifted away during the night, lured by distant sounds or fading instincts. Malik was already up, packing supplies. "Time to go," he said simply. Mason nodded, shaking the others awake. Ethan blinked sleepily, his young face pale but determined. Olivia carefully tucked her journal into her pack, while Lana stretched, flexing her arms with a grimace. North through the hills, Mason reminded them, tapping the faded map they'd copied onto Olivia's notebook. No main roads. Keep low. Keep quiet. They slipped out through a side window, avoiding the front where the infected had battered at the door. The early morning air was damp and cold, the sun just a pale smear behind gray clouds. As they moved, Mason kept scanning the treeline, heart hammering. Every broken branch, every shadow felt like a threat. The land here was wild, rolling hills, deep gullies, overgrown paths. Civilization had crumbled long ago, leaving behind only rusted fences and rotting barns. By midday, they reached an old farmstead. The fields were overrun with weeds, and the farmhouse sagged in on itself, but the barn looked stable enough for a brief stop. Quick rest, Mason decided. Inside, the barn smelled of mildew and old straw. Malik scouted the upper loft, while Lana checked the corners. Mason dropped to a knee beside Ethan, offering the boy a sip of water. "Doing okay?" Ethan nodded, clutching the water bottle. "I just want to get there. To the safe zone." Mason offered a tired smile. "Me too, kid." Olivia sat nearby, flipping through her journal. "If we can cross the ridge by nightfall, we'll be ahead of schedule." "Good," Malik called down from above. "Because we're not alone." Everyone tensed. Malik pointed through a crack in the barn wall. Across the field, half hidden by trees, figures moved, not the staggering infected, but living people, armed, cautious, and dangerous-looking. "Bandits?" Lana whispered, gripping her crowbar tighter. "Maybe," Mason murmured. "Or worse." They crouched in the shadows, watching as the strangers crept closer. There were 3 of them, dressed in scavenged gear, carrying makeshift weapons. Their faces were hard, their eyes sharp, survivors, no doubt, but not the kind you wanted to meet on an open road. "They're checking the farmhouse," Malik said softly. "If they search the barn, we're trapped." Mason's mind raced. Running would draw attention. Hiding risked discovery. Suddenly, Lana nudged him. "Back window. There's a ditch behind the barn. We slip out, circle wide." Mason gave a quick nod. Quietly. One by one, they slipped through the rear window, dropping into the overgrown ditch behind the barn. The tall weeds concealed them as they crawled, hearts pounding, ears straining for sounds of pursuit. A sharp crack, a gunshot, split the air. "Go!" Mason hissed, shoving Ethan forward. The group bolted through the field, weaving between rusted tractors and skeletal trees. Behind them, the strangers shouted, their voices rough and angry. More gunshots echoed, kicking up dirt nearby. Mason felt his pulse hammering in his throat as they reached the treeline, diving into the shelter of the woods. Branches whipped against his face, but he didn't dare slow down. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they collapsed behind a rocky outcrop, gasping for breath. Lana crouched beside Mason, her face pale. That was close. Too close, Mason agreed, chest heaving. Olivia clutched her pack, eyes wide. "Who are they?" "People desperate enough to kill for supplies," Malik answered grimly. "We need to be more careful." Mason ran a hand through his hair, trying to steady himself. They'd almost been caught, not by the dead, but by the living. It was a sobering reminder that the wasteland wasn't just filled with mindless threats. Sometimes, the most dangerous enemies were the ones who still breathed. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows through the trees, the group pressed on. They climbed steep ridges, crossed narrow creeks, and navigated tangled underbrush, always watching, always listening. By nightfall, they reached a small cave tucked into the hillside, barely big enough for the five of them, but better than nothing. Inside, Mason sank to the ground, exhausted. Malik stood guard at the entrance, his silhouette tense against the fading light. Ethan huddled close to Olivia, whispering softly. Lana sat apart, sharpening her crowbar with deliberate strokes. Mason closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the day settle into his bones. They were still alive. Still moving forward. But he knew, deep down, that each day was shaving away at their strength, their hope. The safe zone was still far away, and the dangers were only multiplying. As the cold night settled in, Mason made himself a promise. He would get them there. No matter what it took. The cave was cold, its stone walls damp with moisture that dripped steadily, echoing like a slow heartbeat. Mason sat near the entrance, cradling a small camping lantern they'd salvaged days ago. Its light was dim, batteries running low, but it was better than total darkness. Malik knelt beside him, peering out into the night. The hills stretched before them like dark, hunched shapes, and somewhere far off, faint howls echoed. Mason didn't know if it was infected or wild animals. Either way, it kept his nerves on edge. Inside the cave, the others huddled close for warmth. Olivia whispered softly to Ethan, reading from her notebook in an attempt to calm his trembling. Lana, ever restless, cleaned her crowbar, her eyes flicking to the shadows like a wolf ready to pounce. Mason exhaled slowly. "We'll leave before dawn," he murmured to Malik. "Stick to the ridgelines, stay hidden." Malik nodded, his face grim. "We can't outrun another bandit group. Or a horde. We need distance, not just stealth." "I know," Mason muttered. "But we're already running on fumes." He glanced at his pack. Supplies were dwindling, a few cans of food, half a bottle of clean water, and barely enough ammo to make it through another serious fight. A soft noise made them both turn. Ethan stood behind them, small and pale in the lantern light. "I can't sleep," Ethan mumbled. "Can I sit with you?" Mason gave a tired smile and patted the ground beside him. "Yeah, buddy. Come here." As Ethan settled in, Malik gave Mason a knowing glance. "I'll take first watch," Malik offered quietly. Mason squeezed Ethan's shoulder. "Get some rest when you can," he told Malik. "We'll need you sharp tomorrow." The night passed slowly. Mason dozed fitfully, waking at every small noise, every whisper of wind against the rocks. His dreams were haunted by memories, his wife, his old home, the day the world fell apart. He saw flashes of his neighbors turning, faces contorting, mouths snapping, his wife screaming as he pulled Ethan out the back door. He jolted awake, heart pounding. The cave was quiet, but Malik was tense at the entrance, his body coiled like a spring. "What is it?" Mason whispered. Malik raised a hand, signaling silence. Outside, faint shapes moved. Mason felt his blood go cold. He reached for his weapon, creeping forward carefully. In the dim moonlight, figures drifted between the trees, not the bandits from earlier, but shambling, staggering silhouettes. Infected. Dozens. Mason's chest tightened. They'd stumbled right into the path of a wandering horde. Malik whispered, "We can't stay. If they catch our scent." Mason cursed under his breath, crawling back to the others. He shook Lana awake first. "We need to move. Quiet, fast." She blinked, instantly alert. "What's wrong?" "Horde," Mason hissed. Outside. Olivia woke next, pulling Ethan close as she quickly packed up. Mason hated the fear in her eyes, but she didn't hesitate. She was stronger than she looked. They crept out of the cave, sticking close to the shadows. Malik led, Mason took the rear, watching every step. The infected drifted through the trees, their groans low and guttural. The group slipped between boulders, crawling through thick underbrush. But then, a sharp snap. A branch beneath Lana's foot. The nearest infected lifted its head sharply, sniffing the air. Its ruined mouth parted in a snarl. Mason's heart seized. "Run," he hissed. The group bolted. Behind them, the woods erupted in shrieks as the horde surged to life, feet pounding, hands clawing through the brush. Mason could hear them, dozens, maybe more, crashing through the trees, relentless. They ran uphill, scrambling over rocks, Ethan gasping as Olivia half-dragged him forward. Lana swung her crowbar at a grasping hand, knocking it aside with a wet crack. Malik fired 2 quick shots, clearing the path ahead. Mason fired over his shoulder, hitting a creature square in the chest, but it barely staggered. Panic surged through him. They couldn't outrun this forever. Ahead, Malik shouted, "There!" A ravine. Mason saw it, a narrow crack in the earth, a steep drop flanked by jagged rocks. If they could cross it, maybe they'd slow the infected down. One by one, they scrambled down the slope, slipping and sliding. Ethan yelped as he fell, but Olivia caught him, dragging him to safety. Lana leapt across first, landing hard on the far side. Malik followed, helping Olivia and Ethan over. Mason turned, firing one last shot, then sprinted. The jump was longer than it looked. His foot slipped on the edge. For a moment, his stomach dropped, but Lana's hand shot out, grabbing his arm, hauling him up. They collapsed together, gasping. Across the ravine, the infected howled in frustration, unable to follow immediately. For now, they were safe. But Mason knew this was only the beginning. The wasteland had thrown its first real challenge at them, and the journey ahead would only get harder. He met Malik's eyes in the pale dawn light. "We keep moving," Mason said grimly. "We don't stop." And together, they pressed on into the unknown. The sun was rising behind them, casting long shadows over the cracked landscape. Mason led the group down the dusty slope, his boots crunching on gravel. The ravine they had crossed last night was now just a faint line behind them, but the memory of the chasing infected still clung to their nerves like cold sweat. They hadn't spoken much since dawn. No one had the energy. Malik checked the map they'd scavenged from an old highway patrol car days ago. His brow furrowed as his finger traced a thin line. "If we stay on this route, we'll hit the old interstate by nightfall," he said quietly. Mason glanced over. "And after that?" Malik exhaled. "If the bridge is still intact, we can cross the river and cut 2 days off our journey." "And if it's not?" Olivia asked, her voice soft but steady. Malik gave a tired shrug. "Then we find another way." Ethan shuffled beside her, clutching his small backpack. Mason ruffled the boy's hair gently, giving him a faint smile. "We're getting closer, champ. Just a little longer." Lana walked a few paces ahead, her crowbar slung over her shoulder. She had been quiet since the chase last night, her eyes darting to every sound, every shadow. Mason couldn't blame her. As the sun climbed higher, they emerged from the hills and stepped onto the old highway. The road stretched out in both directions, cracked and buckled, weeds sprouting from the asphalt. Abandoned cars lined the edges, rusted husks, windows shattered, doors hanging open. It was a graveyard of the old world. Mason's stomach tightened. Highways were dangerous. Too open, too exposed. But Malik was right, it was the fastest way forward. "We move quick," Mason said, adjusting his pack. "Stay sharp. We're not alone out here." They weaved between the cars, scanning for supplies but finding little. Most vehicles had been stripped bare long ago. Occasionally, they spotted sun-bleached bones in the seats, a grim reminder of those who never made it out. Ethan tugged on Mason's sleeve. "Look," he whispered, pointing. Mason followed his gaze. Ahead, the highway dipped under an overpass, where several vehicles had collided, forming a massive wreck. It was a choke point, one they'd have to cross carefully. Malik raised his rifle. "I'll scout it." Mason put a hand on his shoulder. "We go together." As they approached, the smell hit them first: rot, dampness, the stink of old decay. Mason's nose wrinkled. The wreck was tangled with wreckage and trash, creating a dark tunnel barely wide enough to slip through. Lana went in first, crouching low, her crowbar ready. Malik followed, his gun sweeping the shadows. Mason motioned for Olivia and Ethan to stay close behind him. Inside the wreck, it was eerily quiet. Dust hung in the air, and Mason's heart pounded as they moved carefully through the narrow gap. A sudden noise, a soft shuffling, a scrape. Lana froze. Malik hissed, "Something's here." Mason spun, just as a figure lunged from behind a collapsed door, a half-rotted infected, its jaw hanging loose, eyes clouded. Lana reacted instantly, smashing her crowbar into its skull with a wet crack. But the noise echoed through the tunnel. More groans stirred. "Oh no," Olivia whispered, pulling Ethan close. From the shadows, figures emerged, thin, twisted shapes crawling over the wreckage, hands grasping, mouths snapping. "Move!" Mason barked. They shoved through the narrow passage, Malik firing short bursts to clear the path. Mason swung his knife, slicing at clawing fingers. Lana fought like a whirlwind, knocking creatures aside. Ethan stumbled, nearly falling, but Olivia caught him, dragging him forward. Suddenly, the tunnel opened, they burst into sunlight, staggering onto the other side of the wreck. Mason whipped around, breathing hard. More infected poured out, crawling through the wreckage like ants. "Keep running!" Malik shouted. They sprinted down the highway, their footsteps slamming against the cracked asphalt. Mason's lungs burned, but he didn't dare stop. The infected chased them relentlessly, shrieking, stumbling, some faster than others. Ahead, the road curved, and there it was. The bridge. Mason's heart leapt with hope, but it was short-lived. The middle of the bridge had collapsed, leaving a gaping hole over the river below. Only the narrow side railings remained, twisted and rusted. Malik skidded to a halt, cursing. "We can't cross." Mason's eyes darted, desperate. "There has to be a way." Lana scanned the edge. "We can use the beams, crawl along them." Mason's gut clenched. The beams were narrow, rusted, slick with moisture. One wrong step, and they'd fall. But behind them, the infected were closing in. "We have no choice," Mason said grimly. One by one, they edged onto the narrow beams, clinging to the side rails, moving slowly. The drop below made Mason's head spin, but he kept his eyes forward, urging Ethan gently. "Don't look down, buddy. Just keep going." Ethan whimpered but nodded, gripping the beam tightly. Olivia followed close, whispering encouragement. Lana and Malik covered the rear, knocking back infected that tried to follow. Mason heard Malik's gun click, out of ammo. "We're almost there," Mason called, heart pounding. With a final push, they reached the other side, scrambling up onto solid ground. Mason collapsed to his knees, gasping. Malik and Lana jumped across last, just as the beams gave a loud creak. The infected screamed, trying to cross, but the beams snapped, sending dozens plunging into the river below. For a moment, there was only silence. Then Mason laughed softly, shaky but alive. They'd made it. But the road ahead was still long, and Dead America wasn't done with them yet. The group moved slowly, their legs aching, their breaths still ragged from the escape at the bridge. Mason glanced back once more, watching as the infected below thrashed in the river's current, carried away by the churning water. They had survived, for now. Malik wiped sweat from his brow, his rifle slung empty across his back. "We need to find ammo soon," he muttered. "And food. Water." Lana adjusted her grip on her crowbar, eyes scanning the crumbling road ahead. "There's a town a few miles up. I saw it marked on the map." Mason nodded, forcing himself to stand taller. "We head there." Carefully. Ethan tugged Olivia's sleeve. "Are we safe now?" he whispered. Olivia offered a thin smile, though her eyes betrayed her exhaustion. "We're safer. But we keep moving." As they continued down the cracked road, the landscape shifted, blackened trees, charred ground, the smell of old smoke. Mason's stomach twisted. He remembered hearing stories about these burned-out zones, places where the military had tried to contain the outbreak by firebombing entire towns. Dead, but not necessarily empty. The sun was dipping lower when they reached the outskirts of the ruined town. Once, it had been a small settlement, probably no more than a few hundred people. Now it was a hollow shell, houses collapsed, vehicles melted to their frames, streets layered in ash. Malik checked the map again. This was Pine Ridge. "Was," Lana echoed grimly. They moved cautiously, weaving between skeletal houses, keeping their footsteps light. Mason felt every noise around them, the creak of a loose shutter, the rustle of a toppled fence, the faint hiss of wind through broken windows. In the center of town stood what remained of the old general store. Its roof was caved in, but the front door hung ajar, and the shelves inside were visible. "Let's check it," Mason said quietly. Inside, the store was a mess, scattered cans, smashed glass, shelves knocked over. Malik and Lana moved quickly, searching for anything useful. Olivia and Ethan stayed by the door, keeping watch. Mason rummaged through the rubble, pulling out a half-crushed water bottle and a dusty can of beans. Not much, but better than nothing. Suddenly, Malik froze. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. The room went silent. A faint sound, scratching. Soft, irregular. Lana gripped her crowbar tightly. "It's coming from the back." Mason gestured for Olivia to keep Ethan behind her. "Stay here." The three crept toward the rear storage room, stepping over broken floorboards. The scratching grew louder, more frantic. Mason's pulse pounded in his ears. Malik raised his empty rifle like a club. Lana moved to one side of the door. Mason reached out and shoved it open. Inside, a figure was crouched in the corner, thin, trembling, human. A woman. Her clothes were tattered, her skin streaked with ash, her eyes wide and terrified. She shrank back as they entered, clutching a makeshift spear. "Wait." Mason raised his hands. "We're not here to hurt you." The woman's eyes darted between them. "Please, please don't." Lana lowered her weapon slowly. "We're just passing through." The woman's breath hitched, and she burst into tears, sagging against the wall. Malik knelt beside her carefully. "How long have you been here?" "Days," she whispered. "Hiding, they come at night." Mason's brow furrowed. "Who comes at night?" The woman shook her head, trembling. "They're not like the others. They watch. They wait." Olivia appeared in the doorway, holding Ethan's hand. "We can't stay here, Mason." Mason nodded grimly. He turned back to the woman. "Can you move? Come with us?" The woman hesitated, then gave a shaky nod. They gathered what little supplies they could carry and left the ruined store, the woman clinging close. Night was creeping in fast, shadows lengthening, the air growing colder. As they passed through the remains of the town square, Mason felt it, a prickle at the back of his neck, the sense of being watched. He wasn't the only one. Lana's grip tightened on her crowbar, and Malik scanned the shadows with narrowed eyes. From the alleys and doorways, faint shapes stirred. Figures, but not the mindless infected they had faced before. These moved with unsettling purpose, lurking just beyond the edges of the light. Mason's gut twisted. "We need to get out of here," he murmured. Suddenly, a loud clang echoed, a can tipping over, a bottle falling. The figures began to advance, slowly, deliberately. "Run," Mason hissed. They sprinted down the street, the woman sobbing, Ethan crying, Malik cursing under his breath. Shapes darted after them, silent, coordinated, herding them like prey. Ahead, an old fire station loomed, its heavy garage door partly open. "There!" Lana shouted. They rushed inside, shoving the door closed just as the first figures reached it. Mason slammed the bolt, heart racing. For a moment, all was still. Then the scratching began, soft, insistent, dozens of hands raking the outside of the door. Inside the darkened fire station, the group huddled together, breathless, terrified. Outside, in the burned town, something waited. Something that wasn't just mindless hunger, but cunning, patient, and determined. Mason clenched his fists. They had survived the bridge, survived the infected. But now, they faced a new kind of danger, and dead America's wastelands were only growing darker. Inside the fire station, the air was thick with the smell of rust, oil, and smoke. Mason paced near the bolted garage door, straining to hear through the layers of metal. Outside, the soft scratching continued, mixed with the occasional thud, as if something, or someone, was testing the door, patiently waiting. Ethan clung to Olivia's arm, his small body trembling. "Are they going to break in?" he whispered. Olivia forced a calm smile, brushing his hair back. "We're safe for now, sweetheart. We just need to be quiet." Malik was at the window, peeking cautiously through a cracked panel. "There's more of them now," he murmured. "They're not rushing us. They're watching." Mason exchanged a grim glance with Lana. "They're not like the usual infected. They're organized." The woman they'd rescued, her name was Harper, sat huddled on the floor, rocking slightly. "I told you," she whispered. "They wait until you're too tired to run. That's how they get you." Lana knelt beside her. "How have you survived this long?" Harper gave a thin, haunted smile. "I stayed hidden. Kept quiet. But they're smart. They knew I was there." She shivered. "I think they enjoy the waiting." Mason ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. They had food for maybe a day, barely any water, and no ammo left. The fire station was solid, but it was a trap, no way out except through the front, right into the waiting horde. "Is there another exit?" Malik asked, scanning the room. Harper shook her head. "Back doors blocked by rubble. We're stuck." Mason exhaled slowly, forcing himself to think. "We'll rest a few hours. Then we make a break for it." "Where?" Olivia asked softly. He met her gaze. "We'll figure it out." The group settled into uneasy silence. Mason took first watch, listening to the faint noises outside. Time dragged, the darkness inside the station pressing in around them. A sudden noise jolted them all, a soft creak, from somewhere above. Mason snapped his head up. The roof. Malik grabbed a metal rod from the floor. "They're on the roof?" Harper let out a panicked sob. "They climb. They always climb." Lana swore under her breath. "We can't fight them off if they come through the ceiling." Mason's heart pounded. "We're leaving. Now." He rushed to the side wall where a tall stack of equipment lockers stood. "Help me push this under the window." Malik and Lana shoved with him, scraping the heavy lockers across the floor. Mason smashed the window with the butt of his knife, careful to knock the shards clear. Malik, you first, help pull the others up. Malik climbed through, landing on the ash-covered ground outside. He reached up as Olivia lifted Ethan toward him. The boy whimpered but kept quiet, slipping through the window into Malik's arms. Harper hesitated, trembling. Mason grabbed her shoulders. We'll cover you. Go! She scrambled up, Malik pulling her through. Lana climbed next, then Mason. Outside, the night was thick, shadows stretching long across the burned-out streets. And the figures were waiting. Dozens of them, lining the edges of the street, standing unnervingly still, dark shapes with pale, gleaming eyes. Mason's breath caught in his throat. Stay close. Don't break formation. Malik held Ethan's hand tightly, his jaw clenched. Where, Mason? There. Lana pointed. The alley. They sprinted together, a tight knot of bodies, charging toward the narrow gap between two collapsed buildings. The figures didn't rush, they advanced in a slow, deliberate line, forcing the group toward the alley. Hurting them. Mason's gut twisted. They were being driven somewhere. The alley was tight and dark, crumbling walls pressing in on either side. Halfway down, they found the exit blocked, a pile of collapsed beams and bricks. No, 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 Malik muttered, slamming his fist against the wall. We're trapped. Olivia gasped. Mason scanned the debris frantically. There, a crawlspace. At the base of the pile, a narrow opening gaped, barely wide enough for a child. Ethan first. Mason ordered. Malik helped push the boy through, his small body squirming into the darkness. Next, Olivia and Harper crawled in, followed by Lana. Mason shoved Malik after them. Behind him, the figures were drawing closer, their pale eyes gleaming in the dim light, silent and steady. Mason took one last breath, then dove into the crawlspace, pulling rubble behind him to block the opening. They squirmed through the narrow tunnel, scraping hands and knees, until they emerged in a hollow basement, dusty, cold, but empty. For now. Mason collapsed against the wall, gasping for breath. Malik wiped his forehead. That was too close. Olivia hugged Ethan tightly, whispering soothing words. Lana sat beside Mason, her expression grim. They're not just monsters, Mason. They're hunting us, like they know where we're going. Mason stared into the dark, his mind churning. The only remaining safe zone still lay far ahead, across the wastelands of dead America. But the road was getting more dangerous with every step, and whatever was stalking them now wasn't going to stop. He clenched his fists. They had no choice. They had to keep moving. And they had to survive. The sun had not yet risen, but a faint gray light was spreading across the cracked wastelands as Mason led the group forward. Their bodies were tired, their steps dragging, but they couldn't afford to stop. Not after what had happened at the fire station. Mason's eyes swept the barren horizon. In the distance, the rusted skeleton of a bridge stretched over a wide, dry riverbed. It was the only way forward. That's the old highway bridge, Harper said quietly, walking beside him. Past that, the eastern zone. The safe zone? Malik asked, his voice hopeful. Harper shook her head grimly. No. But we're getting closer. There's a checkpoint a few miles beyond that bridge. Mason clenched his jaw. A checkpoint meant possible supplies, maybe shelter. Maybe even soldiers. But first, they had to cross the bridge. As they approached, Lana pulled Mason aside. Look. She pointed to the edge of the structure. Figures. Half hidden in the shadows of the collapsed girders, a cluster of infected stood unnervingly still, like statues. Malik let out a sharp breath. Why aren't they charging us? They're waiting, Mason murmured. Just like before. He scanned the surroundings. The bridge's surface was cracked and partially collapsed, with wide gaps and crumbling edges. There was no other way across, the riverbed below was steep, and the sides were sheer rock. We go carefully, Mason decided. Single file. Quiet. Olivia gripped Ethan's hand tightly, whispering softly to calm him. Harper wiped her eyes, taking a shaky breath. The group moved onto the bridge, boots crunching softly on gravel and rusted metal. The infected remained still, heads slightly tilted, watching. Halfway across, a sudden sound tore through the morning silence, a snap of metal. Mason spun just as part of the bridge behind them gave way, collapsing into the riverbed with a roar of falling debris. The infected surged forward. "Run!" Mason bellowed. The group bolted, feet slamming against the unstable ground. Ethan stumbled, and Malik scooped him up without stopping. Ahead, the far side of the bridge loomed closer, but so did another danger. More infected were pouring onto the other end, cutting off the exit. "We're trapped!" Lana shouted. Mason's eyes darted across the scene, then landed on a side ladder leading down to a narrow maintenance platform beneath the bridge. "There!" "Down!" Without hesitation, they scrambled toward the ladder. Malik lowered Ethan first, followed by Olivia. Harper clambered down next, shaking with fear. Lana was halfway down when one of the infected lunged from above, grabbing her shoulder. She let out a cry, kicking wildly. Mason lunged, slamming the butt of his knife into the creature's face, knocking it loose. Lana slid down the ladder, panting. Mason followed last, just as the infected crowded the edge, reaching down with clawed hands. The maintenance platform swayed under their weight, creaking ominously. Below them was a steep drop, jagged rocks and twisted metal. "Keep moving," Mason urged. They edged along the narrow ledge, hearts pounding, as the infected above shrieked and thrashed. Suddenly, a section of the platform gave way with a sharp crack. Malik grabbed Olivia's arm, pulling her back just in time. Mason reached for Harper, yanking her away from the collapsing edge. Ethan let out a frightened sob, clinging to his mother. "We can't stay here," Lana gasped. "This whole thing's going to fall." Mason scanned the underside of the bridge. There, a narrow beam leading toward the far end, partially hidden by rusted supports. It wasn't safe, but it was their only chance. "One at a time," Mason said. "I'll go first." Balancing carefully, he stepped onto the beam, arms stretched for balance. The metal groaned beneath his weight. Step by step, he moved forward, heart hammering in his chest. Behind him, the others followed, clinging to the supports, inching across. Above, the infected screamed and clawed, some trying to clamber down. Halfway across, Mason heard a sharp metallic snap. He whipped his head around, one of the supports was giving way. "Hurry," he shouted. Ethan started crying as Olivia coaxed him forward. Malik kept one hand on the boy's back, urging him along. Harper and Lana followed, faces pale with fear. The beam shuddered as Mason reached the far side. He helped Olivia and Ethan across, then Malik. Harper stumbled, her foot slipping, but Lana caught her, pulling her back onto the beam. They made it across just as the structure behind them gave a final, echoing groan and collapsed into the riverbed below, sending a cloud of dust and debris into the air. The group collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath, eyes wide with shock. Mason sat up slowly, chest heaving. "Everyone okay?" Shaken nods. But as the dust settled, Mason looked ahead, and his stomach sank. Across the cracked ground, stretching as far as the eye could see, was another wasteland, and beyond that, the faint silhouette of the checkpoint. But standing between them and safety was a vast, roving horde, thousands of infected, moving slowly, steadily, like a living tide. The safe zone was within reach. But to get there, they would have to cross the deadliest stretch of dead America yet. Mason tightened his fists, his eyes narrowing. There was no going back. Only forward. The wind howled across the wasteland, whipping dust and ash into the air. Mason knelt beside a jagged rock, his eyes fixed on the distant checkpoint. It was so close, a cluster of reinforced walls and guard towers, faintly visible beyond the endless stretch of infected. Harper crouched beside him, her face pale. "We can't fight through that." Mason didn't answer. His jaw was tight, his mind racing. Thousands of infected swarmed the open land, slow but constant, their numbers an unstoppable tide. Even the faint sound of the group's breath could draw attention. Malik slid down beside them, keeping Ethan close to his side. "There's no cover out there. We'll be seen the moment we step into the open." Lana pulled her scarf tighter around her face, her voice shaking. "We're out of food, out of water. We can't go back. We can't stay here. What do we do, Mason?" Mason closed his eyes for a brief second. He had led them this far, through burned cities, collapsing tunnels, and near-death ambushes. But now, the final stretch stood before them like an impossible wall. He took a slow breath, then opened his eyes. "We wait until dark." They huddled together under the jagged rocks, conserving energy. Olivia soothed Ethan's quiet whimpers, Harper kept watch with wide, sleepless eyes, and Malik quietly sharpened a makeshift spear. Hours passed, and the sky slowly turned from blazing blue to deep orange, then to a heavy, dark purple. As the first stars appeared, Mason rose to his feet. "Time to move," he whispered. They gathered, nerves raw, hearts pounding. Mason pointed toward the far side of the wasteland. "We don't move straight through. We move along the edges. Stick to the shadows, stay low, and stay silent. We move when they move." The group nodded, swallowing fear. They crept forward, hugging the twisted metal and debris. The infected shuffled and groaned, their forms little more than silhouettes in the dark. Mason led, eyes sharp, every sense alert. Harper followed, one hand on Lana's shoulder. Malik carried Ethan, whispering reassurances as the boy clung to his neck. Suddenly, Mason froze. Ahead, two infected stood unnervingly still, blocking their path. He gestured for the others to stop, then slowly drew his knife. He crept forward, each step measured, careful not to make a sound. Closer. The first infected twitched, head snapping sharply to the side. Mason's heart slammed in his chest. But before the creature could turn fully, Mason lunged, a swift, silent strike to the temple. The body crumpled without a sound. The second infected turned too late, just as Mason struck again, driving the blade home. Mason motioned the group forward. Step by step, they moved, weaving through the night, hearts pounding in their ears. Then came a sudden, sharp noise. Clink. A loose piece of metal clattered onto the rocks. Malik froze, eyes wide. "No." The nearest infected jerked, head snapping toward the sound. In an instant, the groaning rose to a chorus, and the horde surged. "Run!" Mason bellowed. They bolted, feet pounding the dirt. The checkpoint loomed in the distance, its faint lights glowing like a beacon. Behind them, the ground trembled as the horde swept forward, a roaring mass of snarling mouths and clawing hands. Mason's lungs burned as he sprinted, pulling Lana along. Malik ran beside Olivia, Ethan bouncing on his back, the boy sobbing into his shoulder. Harper ran at the rear, glancing back with wide, terrified eyes. "Don't look back!" Mason shouted. Ahead, a crumbled section of highway provided a steep shortcut. Mason veered toward it, praying it would cut their time. They scrambled up the rubble, rocks shifting beneath their feet. Mason reached the top first, pulling Lana and Harper up. Malik hoisted Olivia and Ethan, his muscles straining, sweat pouring down his face. From the top, Mason could see the checkpoint's gates, and figures moving along the walls. Soldiers. Guards. "Hey!" Mason roared, waving his arms wildly. "We're here! Help!" A spotlight swung toward them. Mason shielded his eyes as the blinding beam lit them up. "Don't stop!" Lana gasped. "Keep running!" Gunfire erupted from the checkpoint as the soldiers opened fire, not at Mason's group, but at the oncoming horde. Mason's legs screamed with exhaustion, but he pushed harder, charging down the slope toward the gates. Malik stumbled but caught himself, Olivia clinging tightly beside him. The infected closed in, their guttural screeches filling the air. Suddenly, the gates slammed open, and armed guards rushed out, yelling for them to come through. Mason grabbed Harper's hand, pulling her forward. Malik barreled ahead with Ethan, his face twisted in grim determination. Lana and Olivia followed, eyes wide with terror. As they crossed the threshold, soldiers pushed them behind the walls, slamming the gates shut just as the first wave of infected slammed against the barricades. The group collapsed inside, gasping for breath, chests heaving. For a moment, there was only the sound of their pounding hearts. Then Mason slowly sat up, staring at the high, reinforced walls and the armed soldiers surrounding them. They had made it. They were inside. But as Mason looked up at the guards' grim faces and the towering fortifications, a new dread settled in his chest. They were safe from the horde, but what kind of world waited for them inside these walls? Backhand index pointing right. Want part 10, the final part, where they uncover the truth inside the last safe zone? Let me know. I'll write the full 795 words to finish this dangerous journey. Mason's chest still heaved as he knelt on the cracked pavement inside the checkpoint walls. The others were beside him, Malik cradling a sobbing Ethan, Lana clutching Harper's shaking hand, Olivia sitting on the ground, staring wide-eyed at the massive gates they had just crossed. They had survived. But now, Mason's eyes slowly moved upward, taking in the towering steel walls, the armed guards on the ramparts, and the massive searchlights sweeping across the yard. His gut twisted. This didn't feel like a refuge. A gruff voice barked, "On your feet." Mason turned sharply to see a tall figure striding toward them, a man in a military uniform, flanked by two soldiers. His face was lined, his eyes sharp. A commander, Mason guessed. "You the leader?" the commander asked, stopping in front of Mason. Mason forced himself upright, ignoring the ache in his legs. "Yeah, we're survivors. We came all the way across dead America. We were told this was the only safe zone left." The commander studied him coldly. "Safe zone, huh? Depends how you define safe." Mason's stomach tightened. "We're low on supplies," Malik said quietly, stepping forward. "We have a kid. Please, we just need shelter." The commander didn't even glance at Malik. Instead, he raised a hand, and suddenly, two soldiers grabbed Mason's arms. "What? Hey!" Mason struggled, heart hammering. The others shouted in alarm, but soldiers swarmed in, separating them quickly and efficiently. "You want in," the commander said coolly, "you get checked. Everyone does. No exceptions." Mason's mouth went dry. "Checked for what?" "Infection." The word hit like a punch. They were herded into a dim concrete building just inside the walls. One by one, they were lined up under bright lights, forced to strip off their outer layers, their arms and necks examined carefully. Look at their skin. Any bites? Any scratches? Skin the kid, they hide it the best. Ethan sobbed softly as a cold scanner passed over his small arm. Olivia hugged him tightly, whispering soothing words, her own eyes filled with terror. Mason clenched his fists, his entire body tense. He knew they were clean. They had been careful, so careful, hadn't they? Finally, the commander approached, holding a small device. "You're clear." Mason let out a shaky breath. But the commander didn't smile. "Clear doesn't mean safe, outsider. It just means you're not today's problem." The heavy meaning behind those words settled over the group like a weight. They were escorted through the compound, past huddled masses of other survivors, thin and hollow-eyed, sitting against the walls, waiting for something that never seemed to come. Past guarded supply sheds, where desperate hands reached through the fences, begging for scraps. Past armed patrols, their eyes constantly scanning for internal threats, not just external ones. This wasn't a haven. It was a prison. Mason's heart sank. The group was led to a small metal shelter at the edge of the compound. "You stay here until you're processed," the soldier said flatly. "Don't leave. Don't cause trouble. If you do, you're out, or worse." The door slammed shut behind them. For a long moment, No one spoke. Then Lana sank onto the cot, burying her face in her hands. "Mason, what have we done?" Mason sat heavily beside her, rubbing his face. "I don't know. I thought we were coming to something better." Malik paced the small space, his fists clenching and unclenching. "It's a cage. This whole place is a cage." Harper whispered, "What do we do now?" Silence settled over them. Then Mason slowly looked up, his eyes hardening. "We didn't come all this way just to give up now." The group lifted their heads, watching him. "There's more here," Mason continued. "I can feel it. Maybe supplies. Maybe a better section. Maybe even people running things behind the scenes. But we're not going to survive by sitting in this box, waiting to get shoved around." Malik gave a grim nod. "We came across Dead America. We can survive this, too." Olivia tightened her arms around Ethan. "We have to. For him." Mason's jaw set. "Tomorrow, we start watching. We figure out the real rules here. We find out where the food comes from, who's in charge, how this place actually works." Harper's voice was quiet but fierce. "And then?" Mason's eyes burned with determination. "Then we decide. We stay, we rise, or we find a way out." Outside, the infected howled and clawed at the walls, relentless. But inside, behind the steel and the guards, the fight was just beginning. The journey across the wastelands was over. But the real battle, the battle for freedom, for dignity, for a future, was only just starting. And Mason knew one thing for certain. Whatever it took, they would survive. Together. White heavy checkmark done. That's the complete 10-part outline for the dangerous journey across Dead America's wastelands to reach the only remaining safe zone. If you want, I can expand this into full episodes or help craft a script for your YouTube audience. Just say the word. Want me to prepare more titles or new outlines? Let me know.